Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I say everyone, and I'm speaking to everyone that's dialed in or is watching, but also to the one person in this session that's here in the studio with me, to Susan Freeman, partner of Mishcon Derer. Thank you very much for joining me here, but you are not the only person in on this discussion. And we are joined today by three other speakers, two of whom are dialing in from quarantine zones. We have Angelica Donati, venture partner, Concrete VC, and she's dialing in from Italy, which is obviously really feeling the effects of everything that's going on at the moment. Gabrielle McMillan, CEO of Equiam, who's also dialing in from a quarantine zone as of late last night, I believe, and Charlie Wade, European MD of VTS, who is dialing in but not from a quarantine zone. So thank you all so much for joining me today. We're here to talk about technology and not just the trailblazers. How do we ensure that the entire real estate industry embraces AI and data? A really interesting subject and one that we're going to get into in a bit, but how can we start off a session like this with two people phoning in from quarantine zones without asking them how things are, how it's feeling, and what is, what's happened basically over the last few weeks and few days in regards to Italy, and then much more recently, Gabrielle, where you are. So Angelica, if we could start with you, obviously phoning in at the moment from the area that's been hit the hardest outside of China. How is it feeling and how are you all doing over there?
So it's very new and very scary, I think, for everybody here. 2 weeks ago, we still thought it was just a bad flu and it was all overblown and would, subside quite quickly. And then at a scarily fast pace, it went from being something marginal to pretty much everything anybody was ever talking about. They started off by trying to isolate 11 municipalities near Milan, which were affected by coronavirus. Then, when they weren't able to contain it within those municipalities, on Saturday night, the central Italian government decided to lock off all of Lombardy and parts of Veneto and Piedmont. So 16 million people were effectively were quarantined within a red zone, and you weren't allowed to travel out of it. Anybody who traveled outside of the red zone had to self-quarantine for 14 days. And in fact, it's still the case in the UK. People can travel to the UK, but they have to self-quarantine for 14 days if they do so. And then just on Monday night, the radical decision was made to extend the quarantine or extend the red zone to the entire Italian peninsula. So all of Italy is in lockdown, like the Lombardy region was. And what this means basically is that we are strongly encouraged to stay home. Anybody who can work from home, any company that has smart working in place is encouraged to give their employees smart working. If you don't have that, you're encouraged to give people leave. Socializing is banned pretty much. Restaurants and bars must close after 6 p.m. Shopping centers and large stores cannot be open on weekends. And they're thinking about even more radical measures, such as closing down all commerce, in shops, restaurants, bars, everything except for pharmacies and supermarkets. And we're still trying to figure out what's going to happen to companies, to our businesses, because we are all very lost in terms of figuring out how we can guarantee continuity for our clients, but also preserve the safety not just of our employees, but of all the people they come into contact with. So it's a pretty difficult situation to be in.
And what's the morale like? How are people feeling? Or presumably you're interacting with people less, so it's maybe difficult to tell.
So I speak for myself, and I have to say that I can't compare myself to my friends up in Milan or the other parts of northern Italy that have been locked down for longer. But since Monday night, I've pretty much had zero contact with people. I'm at work now. I'm in the office because you're allowed to go to work. And, it's my company, and I've decided that I will be here every day, come rain or shine, until they ban me, because I think that I need to be here, even though 2/3 of my staff are either working from home or at holiday. But not interacting with people is really hard. I think moments like this, and I think, yes, we can talk about that in our chats later. Moments like this remind you of how important it is to have that social contact and how important it is to interact with people.
Thank you very much. And Gabrielle, how's it going over there? So there was a quarantine put in place just last night where you are.
Yeah, so I'm in Westchester in New York. So the US is kind of been late to the game, I think originally based on where it originated from. And in New York in particular, there were no cases up until a week or two ago. And that's changed fairly rapidly. So I think there's now over 100 or more cases in Westchester, which is an area just outside of Manhattan, which is where I am. And in fact, a lot of them seem to have emanated in one particular hotspot, which is literally within a 1 mile radius of my house, which is where they've declared this containment zone. And we're still trying to work out exactly what that containment zone means. But similar to what Angelique was saying, that they're strongly suggesting social distance, and all kind of gatherings are banned. They've shut down all the schools in the area, and so it's still kind of unfolding here. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because we can already see the impact that it's having on businesses and the economy. Some businesses are more impacted than others, but it's deeply concerning watching that unravel and not really, having this level of volatility in the markets and volatility and uncertainty generally, I think is creating a challenging environment. So, from my perspective, we were supposed to be doing 3 launches this week in Seattle. They've all now been changed to virtual launches because we really can't be, flying team members into those zones. And in fact, a lot of the buildings in Seattle are actually, virtually empty of occupants because tenants are telling all their teams to work from home. So, it's an interesting time. I'm hopeful that as more information becomes known, that will allow us to start resuming a more normal kind of rhythm. But at the moment, I think there's a degree of uncertainty in the statistics around the disease and how it works, and exactly how many people are contracting it and what degree of those cases are acute or even result in death. And that level of uncertainty, I think, is driving a lot of this behavior. So I'm hopeful that as more information emerges, we're able to make better decisions, because I think that the impact on the economy is known, and the longer this goes on, the more dire that's going to be for a bunch of businesses.
Thank you very much. So, Charlie and Susan, I know that you're not in quarantine zones at the moment, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts before we get into talking about some of these wider tech issues. Your thoughts on the situation as it's unfolding, both in terms of what we're seeing with the economy, but also in terms of businesses and technology in particular. I mean, there's some, and we're all sort of talking at the moment, I know that you're here, Susan, but using this virtual system and video calling, and will we be seeing a lot more of that happening over the next few weeks? Are businesses set up to be able to deal with that? I know none of these questions were on the list, but times have changed somewhat. So Charlie, could I start with you, and then I'm going to come to Susan here in the studio.
Yeah, of course. So I think the question that our business is set up for this is an interesting one, because we actually had a call last night with the US, and VTS on Friday is going to instill, it's almost like a dress rehearsal. Every single employee on Friday is going to work from home, and we're going to test our systems. So we're going to test our remote working capabilities. We're going to test our platforms. We're going to test how well we can service our clients by nobody being in the office. And we're basically going to have a dress rehearsal for should New York, London, and any other of our sort of locations around the world, should our teams be quarantined and have to work from home, can we deal with it? How resilient are we? Can we continue to offer the best in class service to our clients? So I'll let you know on Monday, but I think we should be okay. Friday will be super interesting. We'll see what happens.
Thank you very much. And Susan, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, it's scary because it's changing on a sort of hourly or daily basis. So whereas last week we were thinking, well, it's MIPIM week, we can hold the lunches and the dinners and things we would have had in Cannes. A lot of clients are now saying that they have protocols in place. They can't go to large gatherings. Some people are saying they don't want to go to meetings at all. So you can see that things are gradually going to closed down, there'll be less social interaction. And just on a positive note, it seems to me that social media is really going to come into its own. I mean, we've been using it in conjunction with other face-to-face meetings, but for a while it might be the only way we can actually really keep in touch with each other. And obviously more digital events like this, and I suppose we just have to learn to make those digital events really, fun and interactive in some way. And in terms of remote working, at Mishcon we are set up for remote working should we need to. So, I take my laptop home, every day, and if somebody phones up and say, right, we're not coming in tomorrow, I can just carry on as normal. But what isn't going to carry on as normal is, the dinners and the meetings and things and the chance interactions. So, and I saw yesterday, I think Google have said that all their North American employees should work remotely, and that's, that's an awful lot of people. So, we were talking with Dror Poleg when he was over here for his book launch about this sort of enforced Chinese experiment on home working, with millions of people having to work from home and having to rely on the sort of various apps and things. And we're probably going to get, to that stage as well.
And one thing I wanted to talk about, which is sort of halfway between talking about coronavirus and technology, so we're getting there, we're getting to the technology part of it, is what you were saying. Actually, I think, Angelica, you mentioned that you hadn't seen anyone really since Monday night, and that it has and will continue to have an impact on people about how they feel, and people feel quite isolated. Now, I've seen a lot of stuff coming through off the back of what's happening, saying, this is the moment where offices will change forever, when people realise, when being forced to work from home and work remotely, that we don't need these places anymore. We don't need them as much as we think we do. We've got all the technology available to be able to do our jobs remotely, or at least a lot of people do, and that it will change things. And then other people coming back and saying, well, no, those social interactions are just so important. And I'm keen to get everyone's thoughts on that. So, Angelica, as you raised the point, could I start with you on that?
Sure. So I think that, there's something to be said about flexibility, because if we didn't have the option to log in and work remotely, we would be in serious trouble right now. Right before our call, I just came off a Zoom meeting. Zoom saved my life this week. And I can understand why they're doing so well in terms of their share price, with my engineers, with my head engineer, who's now at home in Naples, another guy who's working from home, and our architects who are working from their office but can't take meetings because they don't have enough space for us to be all spaced out. Otherwise we would have had to cancel this. So there's a lot to be said about connectivity, but I have to say for myself, I wouldn't work from home. I would still come to the office, just because there's just this, if it's a choice, if you want to work from home, it's great to have the flexibility. But if you have to, at a certain point, it becomes a bit overwhelming, being stuck between the four walls. So I think there's a lot to be said about its usefulness in emergencies, and its usefulness in terms of allowing people better life flexibility. But it's definitely not going to be a substitute for all of our work needs. I just can't see that happening, and nor would I want it to.
Thank you very much. Gabrielle, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's enormous benefit from technology, but I think that technology should be the connector, and obviously I have a biased view on that given what I do for a living, but Equium was created to foster communities within buildings on the basis that humans want to be around other humans, and it's pretty basic known science that physical human interaction is incredibly important to all of us. And I think in many ways technology has actually been a factor in many of us feeling more isolated, less connected over time, with the advent of a lot of social media and the technology that we all know and use today, including our mobile phones. In fact, levels of anxiety, depression, feelings of loneliness, anxiety are higher than ever before. So, my view is that people will always, human beings are, like to have social interaction and in-person interaction. And I think it's really important for us in terms of operating at our best and feeling, at our happiest. So yeah, I think office buildings are not going to go away. I think the ways in which we work are always going to continue changing and improving, and flexibility is awesome. My whole team in the US, has enormous flexibility and works from home a lot. So this has had little impact on our operations here. But, I don't think that office buildings are going to be going anywhere. I think that people need to come together, in the same physical environment to do great work.
Thank you very much. And Charlie, what are your thoughts? How are you feeling about the Friday experiment and seeing how it all goes?
Well, I think I have to remember that my team in particular, I don't think will think twice about working remotely. And I don't think they will suddenly think, oh, this is a really daunting challenge. Friday, I think for them is going to be like, okay, that was a fun experiment. But, not everyone within our company, the 250 organization, feels the same way as, the 25 individuals that sit in London. And I think we have to remember that as well across the commercial real estate industry. I think everybody on this telephone call won't think twice about if they had to work from home, if they needed to work remotely. They could probably still operate and do everything they need to do because, they're very tech enabled and they're just very digitally native, et cetera, et cetera. But that is not true of the whole industry. So what might happen is that if it is a sustained length of time, it might be quite interesting for those that perhaps haven't embraced flexibility or working from home, or maybe gave it lip service but didn't really believe that it could be, a very beneficial way to sort of spend your time, etc. Maybe it will open their eyes to say, well, actually, this is possible. And I ignored it for a week and sat at home and was like, I can't work. And then it came 2 weeks and I was forced to work. And then it was 3 weeks and I actually figured out how to log into my Zoom account. And then it became 5 weeks. And I was like, now I really need to carry on working. And suddenly I forced myself to use all these technologies and tools, which maybe I let the younger kids do in the past. And now I'm like, this is really helpful. And it might actually educate and open people's eyes to what flexibility really is and what remote working is, and how you can still be, very well organized with your time, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm going to look at the positive side of it, albeit I think that might be the only positive I can spin out of us all being forced to not work and go home. So,
well, thank you for finding the positive. Much appreciated. And Susan, how do you feel about it? I mean, a huge organisation here in London, and I'm not. How is the legal profession set up to operate if it were to go and have to do it remotely?
Well, apart from not being able to have the face-to-face meetings. We're set up very well, and I think probably most large law firms are set up in the same way, that we've got access to all the documents, and we can share access to all the documents we need to work on. The problem is with the relationships, because a lot of what professionals do is about relationships with the clients, meeting new clients, and I'm not sure you can engender quite the same sort of relationship with with a Zoom video call. I think we're going to have to learn to do that. But I mean, one thing that occurred to me with this sort of enforced home working experiment is that in some cases it may not go back to how it was. People will have a rethink. So much in the way that retail, some of retail now is a sort of flagship, and you don't have to go there to buy things. You can buy them online. It may be that some of the big corporates will think, well, okay, well, let's use our offices, differently. People don't have to be sitting there every day working in them. Let's get them in for training or team building. But, there may be a bit of a rethink, which is interesting.
Mm. Well, technology and innovation all sort of come into this. And obviously it's an awful situation to be in, and not the reason that we want people to rethink necessarily. But, one would hope that once everything has passed, if there's something has come out of it and people have sort of looked again at how things operate and it comes out stronger, then hopefully, as you say, Charlie, if there's a positive to be found in all this, then if you look really, really hard, maybe that's it. So as promised, we spent about half of the time talking about the overarching issue that everybody's facing at the moment. We'll come back to it at the end, just before we sign off, particularly to our two quarantined speakers. But we do need to sort of things need to go on, of course, at the same time, and that's why Angelica's sort of going into the office every day, and it's important that we also address the stuff that we were going to address, and we were going to talk about AI and data, which are two issues, interlinked issues, which are really impacting the sector at the moment, but the whole point of this was to focus on not just the trailblazers. And I think that everybody that's either on this call or in this room would be classified as a trailblazer. But how do we get the entire industry sort of embracing and comfortable embracing AI and data? Now, if I could start with you on this, Charlie, that would be great. In terms of, do you think there's enough understanding across the whole sector around how we actually define AI, how it operates, and how it can be applied to real estate and the wider world at the moment?
So let's define AI as, I guess, a good place to start and try and define it in the simplest form. So I think artificial intelligence, AI, is ultimately our ability to create intelligent machines or technology, right? So things that look to react and work like humans might. I think within the umbrella of AI, there are lots of different components of it, because it's quite an overarching couple of words. You might hear things around like machine learning or deep learning and things like this. And I think it's important that, in its simplest terms, artificial intelligence is the tech that we just consider to be smart, right? It allows programs or softwares to kind of sense or reason or to adapt to a data set or parameters that we apply. Machine learning is probably more around the current application of AI. So it's based around the idea that we should just give the machine data, and then the machine should just kind of learn for themselves. And I think that's a really interesting concept if you kind of think about AI and think about machine learning, because if we think about commercial real estate, the common theme in both of those things is the reliance on data. And so I think before we can talk about AI and machine learning, we probably shouldn't overlook data and just sort of brush past that. I would suggest that talking about AI in general across the industry is perhaps trying to walk before we've even learned how to crawl. And the old age saying of kind of good data in equals good data out, I think is very, very true, and is incredibly important when you start to think about machines learning off data. It's got to be good, accurate data. So I guess my advice to the industry, and I guess my advice to anyone who's sort of thinking about AI, is I think you first need to kind of focus on what it is you're trying to achieve. Right? What is it that you think AI is going to help you solve? What are the outcomes that you're truly driving towards? And then I think you need to go back to basics, and you need to define the data or the data sets required that are going to help you achieve that. The most important question you should probably ask before you try to think about AI is my data accurate? Is it clean? Is it standardized? Is it in one place? Is it easy to access? And if the answer to any of those is no, then I would suggest you probably start there. Do the basics right, make sure the building blocks are in place before you start trying to do some of the exciting stuff around AI. And in my personal opinion, the industry has a bit of a tendency to overcomplicate the solution, try to deliver the sort of the bigger, longer term vision before really maybe providing a solution for the sort of the immediate challenges or the near-term opportunities. And I would sort of say, start with data, because it will lead to AI and will lead to a more exciting conversation.
Thank you very much. There was a bit of a break up on the line there, but I think you said that the industry has a habit of overcomplicating the solution, which was interesting, and I hope just make sure nobody missed that. Now, Gabrielle and Angelica, you were nodding away through pretty much all of that, which bodes well for what you were saying, Charlie, and also if there's obviously a consensus. So, Gabrielle, if we could come to you first on that. You particularly nodded as Charlie was saying that before we get to our AI, we really need to think about data. Is that Charlie? Is that your child?
We have an extra speaker. Ask that guy what he thinks about AI.
The next generation on our podcast. I love it. Sorry, momentarily distracted there. But sorry, Gabrielle. Can you remember the question I asked? Sorry.
I think I was nodding data. At the risk of reiterating a lot of what Charlie just said, which I thought was absolutely bang on. I mean, there is definitely this rubbish in, rubbish out is at the heart of all of this. And, most of what you can achieve with it, well, pretty much everything that you could achieve with AI is going to be impossible without the right data strategy and the right data structure. And so, I had the same reaction. And I think your original question around, is the industry confused? Does the industry even really understand AI? I would say probably not broadly. there are pockets in which AI is starting to be used, and Charlie's area is one of them. I think that there's a huge volume of transactional data, there's a huge volume of leasing data and valuation data where AI probably has the most obvious early application, and that's probably where I'm, seeing it in our kind of space around customer. There are some things starting to emerge, but to Charlie's point and echoes my thoughts, we're saying to our clients, look, you have to start with a view of what you're trying to achieve. You have to at least start with a hypothesis of what you're trying to understand, which in the case of our customers, it might be something like, can I predict whether a tenant is likely to stay or go based on certain behaviors, or what is the link between engagement and renewal, or what can I understand and therefore predict about the needs of certain industries or certain tenants? Like what services does a telco want to consume versus a legal company? These are all things that can be kind of unpacked from our data. But I think Charlie, you said we've got to crawl before we can run. I think that's certainly where I would say Equium is at and our clients are at, is really actually just putting data strategies in place. Starting to collect the data, because I can tell you it's going to take longer than what you think. And then getting the structure of the data right. And then for us, we're probably seeing two very different customer types emerge within our customer base. On one hand, there are customers who don't really want the complication of owning data. They kind of understand the value of it, but it's more, let's say, rudimentary. So they want to measure engagement and they want metrics, they want simple dashboards, and they want our help understanding what those insights are and what they should do with it. And then we've got a second set of customers that I would say are far more sophisticated in their thinking and far more along the line, and they've gotten to the point of perhaps creating their own private data cloud, and are starting to put multiple data sources into that, starting to hire their own analytics team and put their own BI on it. But it all comes back to that data structure, and I think that's really where most people are in real estate, because the data sources are often legacy, the data is complex, so this is a long process. It's not an overnight thing.
Thank you very much. There are loads of great points in there. I'm conscious of time, so normally I'd pick up on some of those, but I wanted to move on to ask Angelica and then Susan around how we tackle. I think there's quite a lot of nervousness around data. There's a nervousness about getting things right and doing the right thing and the right analytics. But then there's also the wider nervousness around how data is used and the legislation around it and privacy. So Angelica, could we come to you first on tackling that nervousness, and is it as big or broader issue as people think, or is the industry beginning to get its head around it a lot more?
So I think that in real estate, it's a particularly sensitive topic, because historically real estate companies have considered their proprietary data their kind of unique selling point, the thing that distinguishes them from the competition. So there is less of a willingness to share data. And because all this data is siloed within these groups, which, although very big, only take up a very small part of the share of the market, regardless of which asset class you're looking at, it becomes much harder for tech, which, as Charlie rightly said, requires a lot of good data to build it out and make sure the algorithms work and make sure that the models are learning the way they should learn to work properly. So I think there's two levels of concern in real estate. The first level of concern is very specific to real estate, which is my data is my biggest asset and I don't want to share it. And that's one. And then there is the second level of concern, which is more kind of a general consumer concern, which is what happens to my data when I let go of it? Who's going to use it? I mean, there's all these horror stories of, Amazon Alexa systems picking up on information that people are just sharing in conversations which are having privately in their own homes, and then orders showing up on their doorstep, or stuff like that, or retargeting whenever you go online. And so when you start thinking about allowing landlords, let's say, to use your data when you're accessing their buildings, there's a question of what's going to happen with that data. And I think the answer is transparency. So there needs to be some very clear communication between those who receive the data and those who give the data with exactly what's going to happen with that data. And I think in Europe, we also benefit from the fact that GDPR does build out a framework for securing data. But for sure, you need to build a safe environment in which people are happy to give up their data, because unfortunately we've had a lot of negative experiences with megatech companies misusing data, and also we have issues with hacking now. So cloud accounts can be hacked. There's constant news, day after day, about massive leaks, credit card companies, getting broken into, and everybody's details getting leaked. So there needs to be a very significant investment on behalf of all tech companies and real estate companies using that tech in data security.
Thank you very much. Susan, your thoughts on that, and particularly around how the industry is getting its head around data and privacy and the stuff that Angelica was saying.
Yes, well, I echo the points that Angelica made on the on the industry level, and also with with consumers who are increasingly becoming data savvy and want to know what's happening with their with their data, and also picking up on the GDPR point, because there are now additional concerns for corporates that keep data. And I don't know if you saw, there was a German case at the end of last year where a big German real estate company was fined 14.5 million euros for keeping what seemed to be a sort of data cemetery. I mean, basically all they seemed to have done was hoarded personal data that they had over a number of years. So personal data, must have been on their sort of tenants, and they just kept it. And that doesn't sound such an awful thing to do, but it's a bit of a warning bell, because it affects property companies over here and other companies over here as well, who will still be subject to the same rules. So if you're holding data, you can't just hold on to it. You've also got to make sure that you use it and then dispose of it. So that's something else to think about.
Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes left because we have to finish up at 4:30. I know we started a little bit late, and I feel like, it's because we have kind of got halfway through what we were going to talk about. So I feel like we're halfway there, but I do think it was important to have that conversation at the beginning. And it did throw up some really interesting points as well around the future of offices and how technology plays into that. So it is relevant. But we've got 5 minutes left, which is the perfect amount of time just to get everybody's final thoughts, and the message that you would have people sort of log off from this session with. So if we could start with you, Gabrielle, that would be really great.
Sure. A couple of things that I'll close out with. One, just on the how do we keep people's data safe. One of the things that that I'm talking to our clients about a lot at the moment is how much personally identifiable data do you actually need to get the outcome that you're after. So let's say, for instance, you want to understand how space is being utilized. Is it critical in that to actually know that it's Angelica, in that meeting room? Or do you just need to know that it's a certain tenant, or do you just need to know that it's someone? And there's a huge difference in the risk profile of collecting, depending on what you want to collect, and and the cost of maintaining that. So that is something that I would say particularly to landlords that are starting on this journey of what questions am I asking and how do I get answers from data, and potentially how do I use AI to automate that in the future, is really how much personally identifiable information do you really need? Because there's a huge value that can be unlocked from data without needing to have personally identifiable information. And I think if you can avoid it, you de-risk a lot of kind of the uncertainty around data for yourself. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Charlie, final thoughts?
I guess for me, From a technology perspective, I think there are lots of examples of companies that are innovating and developing solutions to the problems that they have and that they've identified as being important to their organizations. But I want the listeners to realize they're probably not as revolutionary as we might think, right? And so I like to sort of take things back to basics, as you can probably tell. At the end of the day, I think any company that's out there needs to first identify what needs to change. What is it that they ultimately are trying to change? We are very appreciative that the pain of change is painful, let's just face it, but the pain of change today has to outweigh the pain of not changing in the future. So as people think about this, once they've established some of the clear objectives or outcomes or things that they're trying to solve for and change for, then they should be adopting technology that drive towards those outcomes. I think tech for tech's sake, solutions because they're what everyone else is doing, or ideas because they sound good and you're using buzzwords like AI, they're not getting you towards clear outcomes. So I would say if you can't identify why change, then you really shouldn't be talking about why you should be adopting any solution. So start with the basics first. And then once you've identified the why change, you've identified the solutions that are going to get you there, nothing else should really matter. Everything else is just a distraction. So just double down, focus on the basics, figure out what you want to change, and then figure out who or what or how you're going to get there.
Thank you very much. Angelica.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. Ultimately, we shouldn't forget that AI is just an operating system for the solutions you want to build. So, I mean, forget the AI, think about the solutions. I'm just going to throw this out there. It's not the topic of today's conversation, but think about blockchain. You know, when there was a blockchain craze, everybody had blockchain everything in their names, but actually then when you dig deep into the solution, most of the solutions could have been offered with standard means. You didn't need to build it on the blockchain. And I think that's the case with a lot of AI startups. And in fact, there's research that shows that about 40% of European AI startups have no AI at all apart from their name. So I think we need to think about what we're offering in terms of practical solutions as opposed to the underlying operating system. That should just be in the background.
Thank you very much. And Susan?
Yes, I just wanted to throw something else in. I mean, we've talked about AI. At the moment, it's largely unregulated. At the end of last month, the European Commission announced that we need some legislation around AI, and I think that's absolutely right, dealing with the sort of legal and the ethical issues. So I think that's something we're going to see coming down the line.
Thank you very much. Well, you guys have basically brought us up to perfect time there. So thank you very much. Thank you all so much for joining me, both in person and virtually and via video. And hope everybody sort of stays safe out there, and particularly to Gabrielle and to Angelica in your quarantine zones. And fingers crossed that we see sort of a healthier time on the horizon for everybody. But thank you so much for joining me. And if anybody wants to find out more information, then you can pick up a copy of our tech guide, which is out this week as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Emily.
Thanks all.
Thanks all. Bye.